Greetings, everyone. Once again, this is Ezri. I'm Kada Junior, Assistant Professor 3 under the Psychology Program of the College of Arts and Sciences at the Rizal Memorial Colleges Incorporated. And I am the instructor for this semester's experimental psychology subject. So, for my students in this subject, kindly follow the instructions that I gave you for this video, and for other students who are not from this class or not from RMC, if you have questions, if you have suggestions, clarifications, or comments, or questions about certain topics on this video, you may drop them down in the comment section so that I may be able to address them personally or via DM or personal message. So let's start. Well, our discussion for this video will be the chapter 8 for experimental psychology, and it is entitled Solving Problems, Controlling Extraneous Variables. So under this topic, we have four subtopics, which are physical variables, social variables, personality variables, and context variables. We will also learn why do we need to control our extraneous variables, because in our previous discussions in chapter 1 we already know what is experimental psychology. In chapter 2 we also discuss the research ethics. From chapters 3, 4, and 5 we discuss the alternatives to experimentation. If we are not going to do or to conduct experimental research designs, if we're not going to utilize them, then we have options to use non-experimental designs. And the main difference between the two designs is that in experimental designs, we are going to manipulate our independent variables. And also in chapter 7, I think, are basics of experimentation. And now is the extraneous variables. Now, why do we need to control our extraneous variables, especially in experiments? As a psychology student, we need to know how important it is to know the ways in controlling extraneous variables for our research, for a good output of our research. And we are sure that the reliability and validity of our research is not compromised. Okay, let's start. Now, physical variables, or what are physical variables? So that's the first question. So physical variables are aspects of the testing situation that need to be controlled. So examples of this are day of the week, experimental room, and lighting. Of course, these are the physical aspects of our experiments. And we need to control them because they do affect how our respondents react to our conditions or treatments based on, for example, the day of the week. Anong araw ngayon? If Lunes ba or weekend ba? Kasi we have different conditioning or mindsets depending on what day of the week. For example, yung Lunes, napakaganda sana ng ating mood during the weekends, tapos Lunes na naman. So yung ating conditioning dyan is parang pagod tayo during Mondays. So dapat we have to know how to address this issue or this variable, because this will really affect the responses of our respondents. Moving forward, how do we eliminate those physical variables completely, or how do we remove them? Because they are called extraneous variables because they affect, or they are the reason that our research will be confounded. Ibig sabihin, ma-compromise yung ating procedure, yung ating results, because of the variables that were not intended to measure, but they affected the responses of our subjects or participants. Now, how do we eliminate them? Or what is elimination, by the way, no? paano ba ginagamit yung word na elimination dito sa confounding or yung tinatawag natin na removal or complete removal of extraneous physical variables. Now, elimination completely removes extraneous physical variables from the experimental situation. For example, soundproofing a room. So, yung room mo, if masyado siyang maingay kasi maraming dumadaan, so you have to soundproof it because it might not be a part of your manipulation or it could disturb the focus and attention of your respondents of what tasks they were given based on what group they were assigned, either control or experimental group sila. So it would really affect. So one way is that you have to soundproof a room. That's just an example. Now, removal of extraneous physical variables prevents them from operating differently across different treatment conditions because, as I've said a while ago, it really affects the mood, it really affects the focus, the attention of your participants or your subjects. And you don't want to disturb their mindset or the other things that could disturb them and not perform the way you want them to perform based on the procedure or based on the variables or based on the treatment or conditions that you have assigned to them. So that is the purpose. Now, why do we have to eliminate all of the physical variables? Now, constancy of conditions naman, it is still a way of eliminating or reducing or controlling our physical variables. Now, constancy of condition controls extraneous physical variables by keeping all aspects of the treatment conditions identical, except for the independent variable. So, for example, test all subjects in the same room or at the same time of day. So that is how we make a constant condition or treatment because if, for example, hindi talaga ma-avoid na Monday lang talaga yung vacant nila lahat or Monday lang talaga ma-cover. So, silang lahat na lang, Monday na lang at the same time din, the same room din. Para constant lahat ng iyong condition or yung treatment mo. Constant lahat yung procedure mo na ina-apply sa kanila. Kasi if di mo yan ma-eliminate, hindi natin yan ma-eliminate. So, we have to make sure that it's equally applied to all our participants or subjects in our experiment. Now, we also have balancing. So how does balancing work? So balancing controls extraneous physical variables by equally distributing their effects across treatment conditions. Now, for example, running half of the subjects in each condition in the morning and half in the evening. So, para ma-balance, no, half of them will be assigned in the morning, so may evening. So, yung another half naman is may morning din at saka may evening. So, mababalance na yan ngayon. So, you will not be afraid of the effects of the day or the time of the day na binibigyan mo sila ng treatment or condition because they were already balanced. And that is how you control physical variables. Now, in which order should you use these techniques? We have 3: elimination, constancy in conditions, and balancing. So first, number 1, you have to eliminate extraneous variables whenever possible. Kung kaya namang eliminate, we have to eliminate them as possible. Pero kapag hindi na, we have to make these variables, extraneous variables, constant. Kapag these conditions, we have to make them constant across all treatment condition. Pero kapag hindi naman sila naging constant, we have to balance na lang. Lastly, we have to make sure na i-balance natin. Yung lahat ng mga extraneous variables dapat ma-experience lahat ng mga participants para it's a part of your treatment already na lahat sila ay naka-experience nun. Now, secondly, we have social. We already have discussed physical variables. Now, we have social variables. Ano ba ang mga social variables? Now, social variables are aspects of the relationships between subjects and experimenters that can influence experimental results. So this includes demand characteristics and experimental bias or experimenter bias. So kung sino yung nagkakandak, may bias siya. Sa research, may bias siya. So we have two, no? Demand characteristics and experimenter bias. Now, yung demand characteristics are cues within the experimental situation that demand or elicit specific participant responses. So these are characteristics from the participants or the subjects that might signal something from the experimenter, and then the experimenter will be prompt or will be forced to act on those demand characteristics. For example, yung ating participants are students, or they were given a task as part of the treatment condition, and then they already want to go home. Gusto na nilang umuwi. So students or the participants, they cue the professors as the experimenters to wrap up their lectures or their treatment conditions by packing their binders. Parang sinasara na nila yung mga binders nila, yung kanilang mga notebooks, books, and water bottles, and by looking at the doors. No, sometimes as students, we sometimes do that. Na kapag parang makita natin na parang sumusobra na sa oras si teacher, no? Sobra na sa time si teacher, may pasok pa tayo, ibang subject na naman, and we have to rush to the other classroom. So, ayan, no? Parang kino-close natin yung mga notebooks natin. Tapos parang aligaga na tayo masyado, no? Gusto na nating tumayo. Saka tingin na tayo ng tingin sa orasan or sa pintuan kasi gusto na natin umalis. Gusto na natin na natapusin ng professor yung kanyang lecture. So, in that queue, yung demand characteristic ng mga students, parang napoprompt minsan tayo no, ng mga instructor na, okay, bilisan ko to kasi parang gusto na nilang umalis. So, that is demand characteristics. And sometimes, it affects because it affects how the experimenter, no, provides the procedure or deals with the procedures if he's going to attend to that demand characteristics from the participants or not. But most of the time, ina-attend talaga yan ng mga experimenters. Kasi natatakot tayo na experimenters, baka umalis lahat ng ating subjects or respondents, mag-alisan sila lahat, no? So, ayan, natatakot tayo talaga na hindi attend yung kanilang mga needs. So, how can demand characteristics threaten internal validity? So, paano ba nito natin-threaten yung ating internal validity sa research? So kapag demand characteristics, no, it can confound on experiments if they vary across experimental conditions. Kapag sa lahat ng experimental conditions, iba-iba yung mga demand characteristics, it affects how the performance of the dependent variables or the respondents are being recorded or are being elicited. Kasi kapag iba-iba yung mga demand characteristics in this particular treatment condition at iba naman dito, so it affects the performance. Especially if grupo yan sila, no? So subjects may act to confirm what they think is the experimental hypothesis. And minsan this gives a cue, no? This demand characteristics, no, can pull the hypothesis from the experimenters. No, nga, dapat pala natapusin or hindi tapusin or ganito pala yung takbo ng experiment na ito. Minsan nare-reveal yung mga deception dahil sa demand characteristics. So we have to be careful of that, mindful of that, no, as researchers, experimental or non-experimental research man. So ano ba ang paraan, no, para ma-eliminate natin or ma-counteract natin yung tinatawag na demand characteristics. So, in a single blind experiment, subjects are not told their treatment condition. So, for example, in a single blind drug study, the experimental and control groups might receive capsules that look and taste identical. So, ibig sabihin, they know nothing about the treatment conditions. Yes, they were assigned to the experimental or the control groups, but they don't know nothing about the treatment that were given to them. So in that way, hindi nila alam kung ano yung ine-expect sa kanila. So how do single blind experiments control demand characteristics? Now, kung yung subjects natin are not told about your treatment condition, this will eliminate cues that might alter their behavior. So dahil hindi nila alam kung ano yung ine-expect sa kanila or hindi nila alam yung ano yung conditions na inassign sa kanila, so they will do nothing about their behavior and they will just follow blindly, no? Because yun yung rules ng single blind experiment. Now, we also have the placebo effect. The placebo effect is when a subject receives an inner treatment and improves because of positive expectancies na hindi naman or wala naman, no? Wala naman talagang effect sa kanila. Positive lang. Placebo lang, no? So, ibig sabihin yung placebo effect, for example niyan is that nasa experimental group ka, then single blind experiment, no? Kasi yung control group is sila yung nakaka-receive ng treatment. Yung experimental is wala, no? So, nasaan yung placebo doon ngayon, no? So, binibigyan din sila the same. They were told na etong treatment na ito ay naibigay din sa ibang grupo. So, kahit wala naman, so yun yung placebo doon. Parang it's similar or identical to deception, but placebo is more of giving positive expectations to them, to the respondents or our um, participant subjects. Now, how do cover stories control demand characteristics? Yung cover story natin ngayon dito is napakalaga because these are false, plausible explanation of the experimental procedures to disguise the research hypothesis from the subjects. So, minsan hindi nila kailangan malaman yung ating hypothesis, and by giving them a cover story, even though it's false, even though it's deception, they need to believe them so that hindi maapektuhan yung kanilang or hindi ma-alter yung kanilang behavior kasi di nila alam kung paano yung ine-expect from them. They should be used sparingly, however, because they are parts of deception or forms of deception. So yun yung sinasabi ko na because they are deception, we have to be careful. Especially, we have to be consistent from all treatment conditions. Especially if we have single subjects or yung subjects natin is the same groups lang, no? Now, moving forward, what is experimenter bias? Now, experimenter bias kanina, social variables natin is we have demand characteristics and experimenter bias. Now, what is experimenter bias? So experimenter bias is any behavior by the experimenter that can confound the experiment. So ibig sabihin minsan kasi we have biases, or we have prejudice, we have discrimination. And sometimes it appears, no? Even if we are not intending it or we do not intend to surface them, no, unconsciously, because these are sometimes we are unaware of our biases, no. They really appear to the way we give instructions to our participants, to our subjects, and that could affect the experiment. So, for example, an experimenter might provide more attention to subjects in one condition than the other because sometimes may bias doon. Mas favorite niya yung grupo na yun kaysa sa dito. So that is one example of experimental bias. Now, what is Rosenthal effect now? Rosenthal effect is the phenomenon in which experimenters treat subjects differently based on their expectations, and the resulting actions influence subject performance. So, Rosenthal effect is simply dahil tayong experimenter, minsan may expectation na tayo sa group na ito. So, experimental or may ini-expect tayo sa group ng controlled one. Controlled tsaka experimenter. So, yan yung nagiging bias natin kasi yung treatment natin ngayon dyan is iba. Magiging iba, especially if tayo mismo, no, may bias tayo. So, minsan, this is called Pygmalion effect or self-fulfilling prophecy. So, minsan, ang nangyayari, dahil ito yung gusto natin makita, yung sa hypothesis natin, ang nangyayari, we fulfill, no? we fulfill, we self-fulfill the results of the study. Now, we make the results of our study more of a fulfilling prophecy rather than the nature of the study would take its course. So that is Rosenthal effect. Now, for example, teachers might give more attention and feedback to high aptitude students than to low aptitude students. Ayan, no? Yung mas mataas performance ng mga estudyante, yun yung binibigyan nila ng atensyon at feedback. Now, the Rosenthal effect can confound an experiment producing results consistent with the experimenter's expectation. So, ayan, dahil ito yung ini-expect nila, ito yung naging treatment nila, so yung ang result, so nagiging congruent siya sa experimenter's expectations. Ang nangyayari, confounded na yung study mo. Yung say confounded na, compromise na yung study mo because of your bias. And because of your tinatawag nating Rosenthal effect. Now, why is a double-blind design superior to a single-blind design in control experimenter bias? Kanina, we learned, in order to control demand characteristics na social variable, so you have to use single-blind experiment. Now, why double-blind is superior to single-blind design in controlling experimenter bias? Because in single-blind experiments, we control the demand characteristics. Now, in double-blind experiments, we control both demand experimenter bias because wala tayong alam kung sino sa kanila is yung group, no? Sino sa kanila, yung controlled, sino sa kanila yung experimental. So, wala tayong alam. Both of us, no? The experimenter and the participants, walang alam. Kaya, wala tayong magiging bias, no? So, paano yan, sir, no? Yung tanong is, paano yan, sir, no? So, may mga paraan para na makagamit tayo ng double-blind experiments. Kasi if tayo lang, no? Wala tayong ibang facilitator, so hindi pwede. Now, how might an experimental's personality affect experimental result? So, research on experimental personality shows that when experimenters are warm and friendly, subjects learn more, talk more, earn better test scores, and are eager to please. So, ibig sabihin, mas cooperative yung ating mga respondents or yung ating participants or subjects kapag engaging yung facilitator or yung experimenter. On the other hand, hostile or authoritarian experimenters obtain inferior subject performance. Yung kabaliktaran naman. Now, how can experimenters control personality variables? Diba? We have already the physical, already have the social, now personality variables. So how are we going to eliminate or control personality variables? Now, we have to employ multiple experimenters to run an equal number of subjects in each of the experimental conditions balancing. So, dapat marami yung experimenters natin. And then, iba-iba, no? Lahat ng mga treatment dapat madaanan yung lahat ng ating mga experimenters para yung treatment is the same sa lahat ng ating conditions. No? Makita natin na balance yung treatment na kung may mabait man, may hindi, may hostile, ganyan. At least lahat sila nakaranas. So we have to treat experimenter as an independent variable in statistical analysis. Why? Because of an interaction is found, then the experiment was confounded. So ibig sabihin, kapag interaction sa experimenter is found or wala, ibig sabihin, naapektuhan ng ating experiment sa personality ng ating mga experimenters or yung nag-facilitate ng especially survey or treatment conditions. Now, how can experimenters control personality variables when there is a single experimenter minimize face-to-face contact and closely follow the script? So, videotape sessions to confirm consistent performance. So, dapat minimize pala daw yung face-to-face contact kapag single experimenter lang as much as possible. Audio recording lang yung naririnig na instructions or binabasa na lang ng ating mga participants yung instructions. Or as much as possible, we have to videotape the sessions para ma-confirm natin na consistent yung performance ng ating experimenter. Now, how do volunteers differ from non-volunteers in experiment? Ito. So, volunteers are more sociable. They score higher in social desirability and hold more liberal social and political attitudes, and are less authoritarian and score higher on intelligence tests than non-volunteers. Now, lastly, we have context variables. Ano ba ang context variables? No, these are extraneous variables produced by experimental procedures created by the research setting environment, like assignment of participants to conditions. Now, you have a good example for that. So when might subjects select the experiment? So when we allow subjects to sign up for experiments whose titles differ in their appeal. For example, the memory test experiment, the heavy metal music experiment. So however, this could result in a biased sample threatening external validity. Kapag yung pinapapili natin yung ating mga subjects sa experiment na gusto nilang, kasi they will lean their behavior towards the expectation. No? Pag alam nila yung hypothesis, especially yung purpose ng experiment. So why shouldn't you run your friends in your experiment? Bakit bawal yung friends natin no, na gawing participants? So selecting your friends might bias your sample, threatening external validity. Both you and your friends might act differently in your experiment than strangers. Of course, no, kapag kilala mo yung participants mo, we would really act differently, no? Especially or compared to the strangers. Now, summarize the folklore about subjects. So subjects who sign up late in the semester may be less motivated and may behave differently than those who sign up earlier in the semester. So this is really a challenge, no? Especially kapag nag-alis tapos may pinalit ka. Yung papalit na is napakalaking challenge yan, no? Kasi maaaring hindi niya kasabay, no? Yung hindi niya maintindihan yung ibang nasa experiment na nasa group nila, experimental or control. Now, Rosenthal speculated that the differences seen at the start and end of experiment may be just as likely due to changes in the experimenter. So, yan ang pinaka-importante, no, sa Rosenthal effect. So, I guess that ends our presentation for this video about controlling our extraneous variables. As a summary, we have learned that there are 4 extraneous variables. We have physical, we have social variables, we have personality variables, and we have, lastly, ano nga yun, yung last natin, context variables. So, it is very important to know how to control them because if hindi natin na-control yung ating mga variables, tawag natin dyan is they become confounding variables and then hindi na valid yung result natin. Nati-threaten na yung internal at external validity ng ating research. That is why it's very important to know how to control them. So for my students, kindly follow the instructions I gave you for this video, and for other students not from this class or from RMC, do not forget or do not hesitate to send your questions. Do not hesitate to send or to comment down your suggestions, comments, or questions, clarifications, because I will try my very best to address them all. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video, and for our next video, keep updated. That will be chapter 9, and see you in the next video. Thank you so much and have a great day ahead.